70th anniversary of the founding of the PRC has been marked by a huge military parade in the center of Beijing. While many are impressed by China's advanced defense capabilities, some still revert to the cliché of China as a security threat. So what is China's military role in global affairs? How does the PLA defend the country against the domestic and international security challenges? And how will new technology reshape future conflicts? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Senior Colonel Zhou Bo from the Ministry of National Defense, and via satellite from Colombo, Jayana Colomberge, former Chief of the Sri Lankan Navy. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to Dialogue, Senior Colonel. The world media focused on the massive military parade to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the PRC's founding. What do you think of the implications of staging such a big military parade?
Well, I think partly it is a cultural thing, because even in the past we had quite a few grand parade, and this turned out to be the largest one. Besides, it certainly raised the morale of Chinese servicemen, as well as the patriotism of all the Chinese people. 70 years is a long time, and the people can see how PLA actually has grown from strength to strength.
But do you think the military parade will help promote people's real perception about the PLA defense capabilities?
In a way, yes, because it's the most direct way for people to see everything in terms of transparency, because I believe will showcase most of the state-of-art weaponry and equipment. Besides, there are a lot of things that are not that visible. For example, the real combat readiness and how why you are not, because China PLA is not really war-tested in the last 40 years, but it is only through this kind of a parade that people actually are aware of this ongoing process of PLA's modernization.
Let me cross over to our Sri Lankan friend. Hello, Kalambage. Nice to have you again on our program, but world media reports have given conflicting signals about the military buildup of the PLA to commemorate the 70th anniversary. Now, first of all, your comments on the military buildup of China. Do you think China is able to defend its own sovereignty and to cope with conventional and unconventional threats?
Well, I think now in the 21st century, every country is concerned about protecting its own national security, national integrity and sovereignty. And China, like any other country in the world, have the right to develop their military and to be as a deterrent. I mean, to me, I look at a military as a deterrent, so that we can actually avoid war by having a very strong military. I mean, if one side is very weak and the other side is very strong, then there is potential conflicting situation. But when you have equal powers or near equal powers, I think you can have a better deterrent. So to me, having a big military or a modernized military, as in the case of China, is a deterrent, so that there will not be a war between two major powers in the world.
Despite enormous efforts by the PLA to modernize its own weaponry as well as military theories, and despite campaign to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, it seems the rest of the world see an escalation of arms race in Northeast Asia. Do you agree that this area, which may follow the Middle East to become the second most volatile region, the United States would say the U.S.-Japan Security Pact would lay the groundwork and becomes the cornerstone for ensuring regional security? I'd like to have your thoughts.
The United States is the preeminent military and the economic power in the world, and we do see that the China is rising very fast economically and militarily. So I believe no established power has gone out of the world or gone out of equation peacefully. And I think right now in the 21st century, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean are key oceans in the world. And the trade, especially the maritime trade across the ocean, is crucial to the sustenance of the world. And therefore, I'm sure the America is worried about the preeminent position that it is enjoying. And also, I believe China has the right to engage in military build-up to defend its own territory and sovereignty. Only thing, it should not lead to a clash between the two superpowers. And naturally, USA is concerned. I mean, USA was the global policeman, and they were all over the world, and many countries actually benefited from having a policeman without actually having to pay for it. But now, as China developed economically, I believe China is also considering the need to protect its trade, I mean, especially the oil trade coming from the Persian Gulf. We know in the 2009 how the Somali piracy impacted on the global maritime trade. So naturally, everyone, the United Nations invited all the navies to come to the Indian Ocean and to protect their shipping and the other shipping. I mean, that is the requirement of the time. So I believe this should not really lead to a conflict, and I don't see the South China Sea area as a potential high conflict area. I do see that in the Western Indian Ocean, we do have high potential conflict areas in Yemen, in Iran, and in Strait of Hormuz, and basically around the Persian Gulf. And I don't see the same kind of tension in South China Sea. To me, South China Sea is a regional matter, and I think the regional countries should handle this bilaterally and as a region. And I do believe that there should be some kind of a code of conduct agreed upon and implemented so that the area will remain peaceful, and the mistrust that is prevailing in the South China Sea can be avoided.
Thank you very much. Senior Colonel, despite the blessing of years of consistent and persistent peace and stability in East Asia, we see a lot of sectarian violence in the volatile region of the Middle East between Sunnis and Shiites, and look at the exodus of asylum seekers that swept through the whole of the continental Europe, leading perhaps to the appeal for Brexit. Now, do you believe, since he took office, President Xi Jinping, along with the Central Military Commission, are clearly aware of the conflicts and the growing dangers in many parts of the world, and therefore they have successfully overhauled and restructured the command and control structure of the PLA armed forces? Do you think in this way we are ready to combat whatever threats, conventional or unconventional, to defend the national security of the PRC?
Well, that is certainly a very good question, because in terms of the role of the PLA, we have to take into account of the huge background that China is now a major power. So it's not only territorial defense you got to do, but also you have two things more. One is your ever-growing national interest overseas and the company international responsibilities. So we have enjoyed peace for the last 40 years. So we're not quite sure whether this PLA, with even such a fine tradition in the past, can fight and win, because we now consider it a disease of taking peace for granted. So in terms of the threats overseas, that is even a bigger challenge, because we do not have enough jumbo lifting planes for power projection, and we so far only have one logistics supply station in Djibouti. So where should we go in terms of the threats? The threats probably are found everywhere. So what kind of threats are we talking about? Right now, China has 140 million people going abroad every year. So we just cannot send the soldiers behind every Chinese tourist.
But they are likely to be the soft targets of extreme attacks or the rise of extremism.
Yeah, of course, that is the issue. First of all, you should solve all these problems through diplomatic channels, because, as I said, we just cannot send out so many soldiers. But you have to be prepared. For example, if in a mass kidnapping situation, when diplomacy failed, so then you got to do what you are trained for, what you are prepared for.
Chinese media have been talking about successful evacuation of Chinese personnel and nationals from Libya and Yemen. Do you think the PLA stands ready to help in this situation?
Well, those two are certainly good examples, partly because the Chinese ships patrolling the Gulf of Aden are close by, so that makes us much easier than before to come to the rescue of all these Chinese citizens trapped in Libya and Yemen. So that is why the base of Djibouti is important, because it allows our ships to anchor, and it also gives us a good place for our, for example, peacekeeping troops and those troops involved in industrial relief to come and rest.
Mr. Kalambage, here is a question about the military theory. Now, the military capability of the PLA largely comes from how we are able to construct our new military theories to conform with the build-up of the military hardware. Now, we've been discussing in the Beijing studio about conventional or unconventional threats that led to the exodus of asylum seekers, as well as civil wars in Libya, Yemen. Now, the PLA, since its inception of modernization 40 years ago, started to look at our capability to project our armed forces so that our soft targets and our overseas stakes could be protected. Let's have your comments on core concepts about new and modern military theories.
I do see that, you see, the PLA initially was basically considering about its own territorial security, and then the near the territorial, the territorial sea. But now I think since you have become, since China has become an economic power and the trade is more important, the freedom of maritime commerce is key to the sustenance of Chinese economy and the prosperity of Chinese people. Now, in that sense, you will have to project your power a little beyond your shores in order to protect your maritime commerce, at the same time contribute to the international and regional peace. I think that's another role PLA is playing, and PLA should be focusing more, not necessarily protecting China and the Chinese interests, but to protect the entire region and thereby contributing to the international system. So right now, I think China have the capabilities and the capacities to build very quickly. I mean, I read in the morning that China launched a landing platform helicopter from scratch to the launching stage in 9 months, and that is a remarkable speed. And I also read that in 12 months that you will be able to do all the testing and conduct the sea trial. Now, this is amazing speed, and I don't think any other country has that kind of speed and the capability and the capacity. So China has that capability, and you will have to play a more regional and international role in maintaining the peace and stability in the whole world.
Thank you so much. You are watching Dialogue with Senior Colonel Zhou Bo from Ministry of National Defense, and we are satellite from Colombo, Jayana Kalambage, former Chief of the Sri Lankan Navy. We'll be coming back. Stay with us. Welcome back. The latest sensational front page stories about the Middle East, I'm afraid, was drone attacks against 2 important installations in Saudi Arabia, leading to serious shortage of oil supply from this most important part of the world in terms of energy security. Now, military experts have all been studying the implications of such attacks, because armed drones are different from conventional hardware of the armed forces. They were used in Afghanistan to combat the Taliban, and they were also used in Yemen. Now, do you think we are also aware of the strong ability and the prospects that in the foreseeable future, drones will help change the nature of armed conflicts?
Well, this kind of attack is certainly a good lesson for PLA because all the world knows that China now produces some of the best drones in the world. But are we equally prepared for attacks from drones? That is a good question because we have produced a quite large number of red flag series of air defense missiles. But as I said before, we have enjoyed peace for 40 years, so we do not have a chance of actually testify these kind of missiles. But look at these drones. They could be extremely affordable, and they are so agile, so even they are so useful to conduct attacks on the oil tanks of Saudi Arabia, which actually has reduced the output by half. So this kind of alarm bell really is very huge, very loud for every military planner. So we have to, when we look at the new dimensions, new paradigms of warfare, so I think this is the latest element that every military strategy has to take into account.
To the knowledge of many Chinese observers, our energy supply line needs to be protected by our own PLA Navy, and the Indo-Pacific Ocean is of course very important for the protection of our overseas stakes. So do you believe, along with the flotilla that is required to protect our oil tanks in Somali waters, more warships from the PLA are needed to ensure that our energy security will be fine?
Well, of course we need to have a permanent naval presence in the Indian Ocean. Ever since the end of 2008, we have at each given time maintained a strength of 3 ships altogether. Initially, they would work there in the Gulf of Aden for 3 months, and now they would definitely work for more than 3 months, because after leaving the job, they would sail along the uncharted water around the globe, be it the West Africa or in the Bering Sea, to test the untested water. The Indian Ocean is extremely important for us. We not only in terms of oil import, but also in terms of personnel working in the rimland of the Indian Ocean. So China definitely has a huge stake in maintaining the safety and security of sea line communication. And in that regard, China and the Indians actually are both stakeholders. And a good example is how we actually have cooperated in the Gulf of Aden. Actually, Indians have saved Chinese ships just pirated by pirates. So Indian Ocean is not India's ocean, but that is why we should actually cooperate there instead of looking at each other in this kind of zero-sum game mentality.
I believe the spirit of constructive cooperation between the Indians and Chinese must have been greatly enhanced since the Wuhan summit between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping. Let's look at the US-China relationship. Now, these two biggest militaries will, of course, guarantee peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific Ocean. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper said recently that China is the Pentagon's #1 priority. What did he mean? And he says that China poses a greater long-term threat than Russia. Why does the U.S. always target China as a security threat?
Well, I think what he said is not new. Actually, it is even said by his predecessor, and which actually came out from the two defense strategy report in which the U.S. portrayed China as the top strategic competitor, overtaking Russia. We in China were actually taken aback by this kind of description. Actually, in Pentagon, right now, great power competition is acronym. So they believe this kind of competition has already started. The question is whether we should enter another Cold War or not. But we in China do not believe in this. We still ask for avoidance of confrontation and conflict. Because if you look at China actually hasn't changed much, at least in terms of its attitude toward the United States. What has changed is our strength. But the problem is the Americans actually are disappointed because of their own misconception about China. It's not because that we have done something wrong. We have never threatened the United States.
Are you suggesting this is actually a matter of a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Well, if they continue to embark on this road, I hope it won't become realized, because in the last 200 years, the U.S. has been the strongest nation on earth, and they have a kind of a misunderstanding about China. They believe China eventually would become like the United States. Probably they believe in the world there are only two kinds of people. One is America, and the other is those people who eventually would become America. But China won't become Americans, so they are disappointed. But such kind of disappointment is with your own illusion. It's not our mistake. China is not threatening anybody. China has not invaded anybody. So what has China done wrong? So this is my question.
Sending warships to adjacent waters near the Chinese islands and reefs in the South China Sea under the label of protecting freedom of navigation and overflight has become common for American Navy. Do you think we're going to have sort of more of a brinksmanship game that's likely to spark real confrontation?
No, actually, that is what I'm most worried about, the follow-up operations. The point is, when China look at this issue, and when Americans look at the issue, they look at the same issue in different lights. China essentially believes this is a sovereignty issue. China is safeguarding Chinese sovereignty on Chinese soil. But Americans believe these are artificial islands. With artificial islands, you can only have a 500 meters safety distance. But when it is your territorial sea, then it's totally different. You're entitled to have 12 nautical miles. So you can see the huge distance between China's claim and American claim. So the problem is Americans insist to come to challenge you, because they are quite open about such kind of challenges, because they say they challenge everybody. They challenge everybody excessive claim. So China do not look at this as an issue of violating any international law. China believes itself in observing international law, but the interpretation of the same international law is different. So that is a fundamental difference. But because Americans' increased follow-up operations are so close to Chinese rocks and islands, these kind of behaviors are intrinsically dangerous, because Chinese look at this as a sovereignty issue, and China would not give up any rights on its sovereignty.
Here is a growing sense of uneasiness on the side of American Pentagon that islands and reefs in the South China Sea that we claim our territory have been weaponized, and they show great concerns about the implications of this move by the PLA. Of course, this is their allegation, but what do you think of the anger?
Well, this actually by the term militarization, because this is what Americans accuse China of, militarizing these rocks and islands. We do not believe we are militarizing anything, because if you look at any dictionary, it's very hard to define what militarization is. If we believe this is our territory, we can definitely put up some weapons for self-defense. We can do whatever we want. But look at your increased fund operation. While the United States claims that it takes no side in the South China Sea, while the United States claims that it has no position on the sovereignty of South China Sea, why would you increase your fund operation? Won't we take these fund operations themselves as a kind of militarization? So this kind of a tit-for-tat acquisition is meaningless.
China has recently sent armed forces, including bombers and tanks, to the Center 2019 strategic drills in Russia. And that reminds observers, Chinese and international, of the annual war games that are held between Moscow and Beijing. On the other hand, authorities, Chinese and Russian alike, claim they would not forge the treaty alliance that we did in the early 1950s. By the way, the former Soviet Union was the first country that had recognized the People's Republic of China back 70 years ago. So what do you think of the nature of such massive war games between these two major militaries?
Well, this certainly has raised a lot of concern and worries in the West because according to some grand strategists, China and Russia should never be too close with each other. But right now, I think there is a kind of increased rapprochement between our two great neighbors. Yes, even in history, we have a sweet and a bitter moments, but these are facts. As you said correctly, the Soviet Union was the first country to recognize the People's Republic of China. And the former Soviet Union actually has laid the industrial basis for China.
In the first 5-year plan
Yeah.
of our industrialization.
And now Russia has adopted Huawei's 5G technology. So, and Russia, even in the future, would still be extremely useful for us in all aspects, including energy export to China. So we, of course, as great neighbors, share great similarity in terms of our outlooks for the world. So it is natural that the two
strategic relationship is characterized by the Chinese as the special comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination. All right, thank you so much. That's Senior Colonel Zhou Bo with the Ministry of National Defense. Earlier we were also talking to a former chief of Sri Lankan Navy addressing the issue of religious extremism and how to combat non-conventional threats such as secessionism, terrorism, and extremism in Central Asia. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.